Today's daf is daf Mem Aleph, and we'll start with the Mishnah 3 lines down from the top of Mem Aleph, Amid Aleph. Hacholitz liyavimto, v'nasa achiv es achosa umes. So the case is the following. We have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. Reuven marries Rachel, and after his death, Shimon gives chalitza to Rachel. Levi marries Leah, the sister of Rachel. Levi dies, and his wife, Leah, falls for Yibum to Shimon. And the only issue here is that Shimon already gave chalitza to Rachel, the sister of Leah. Leah is now falling for Yibum from Levi, but Reuven, when he died, he left Rachel for Yibum, and Shimon had implemented chalitza with Rachel. Now, he was not miyabim Rachel, so that when Leah falls for Yibum to Shimon, she's not an erva of achos ishto. But nevertheless, since he gave a chalitza, there's a drabanan issue here. And that is that the Rabbanan view chalitza as a kind of gerushin, which kaviyachol comes after nisuin, after marriage. So it's almost as if Shimon was married to Rachel Eshes Reuven. And therefore, choletzes velomis yabemis. So that Rachel, who is the chalutza, is considered as if she was a nesua and a grusha to Shimon. And as a result, when Leah falls for Yibum from Levi to Shimon, it's as if he's marrying the sister of his wife, which is called achotz chalutzoso. And that's midrabanan. On the Raisa level, however, Leah falls for Yibum to Shimon. And the reason for that is because although Shimon gave chalitza to Leah's sister Rachel, he had not married her, he never consummated that relationship. So therefore, Leah for sure needs chalitza. Otherwise, she's Yevamot shuk. She falls for Yibum to Shimon. But on the other hand, Shimon does not have the option of being miyabem Leah because he already gave chalitza to Leah's sister Rachel. And that's why the Mishnah Paskins choletzes velomis yabemis. V'chein, and the Gemara is going to take up this word v'chein. Amagarish es ishto. Now, on a doraisa level, as we'll see, Rebbe is going to, the Gemara is going to quote Rebbe. Once a man was married to a woman, he's not allowed to marry her sister as long as his wife is alive, and even if it's his ex-wife, so even after gerushin, he still remains asur to his ex-wife's sister, the iser erva v'achos. That's Leolam Veyad until Nebuch, his wife, dies. His former wife, we'll call it. So now we have the following case. Once again, we have Reuven and Shimon are brothers, Rachel and Leah sisters. Reuven marries Rachel, and then he divorces her. Shimon marries Leah, the sister of Rachel, and Shimon dies. Leah now falls for Yibum to Reuven. A rezu p'tura. Now we have a doraisa law, and that is that since Reuven was married to Rachel, and he divorced his wife Rachel. So when Shimon's wife Leah, who's the sister of Reuven's wife Rachel, falls for Yibum with the death of Shimon to Reuven, she is now achos grushosal, which, as we said before, is an Isur Erva of achos ishta. And the Mishnah Paskins are rezu p'tura, meaning in this case, as opposed to the Reisha, there's no need even for chalitza, because this is straight from the first Masechet of an Erva that achos ishta Reisa. That's why the Gemara is going to point out the word v'chein here is a tricky word. Maybe we should take it out. Next we go on, and we have the case of a Shomeres Yovam Shekidesh Achiv Es Achosa. So once again, we go back to the case of three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies, and Rachel falls for Yibum to Shimon and Levi. Levi was Makadesh. I emphasize the word Kiddushin. We're not yet ready for Nesuin, for what's called Knisa L'chupa, but Levi was Makadesh Leah, the two Lamas, who is the sister, of course, of Rachel. And now we have a very strange situation. We're sort of like in limbo now, because the moment that Levi is Makadesh Leah, then Rachel, who is his Zakuka, Yibum, is now in a situation of Achos Ishta. So Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omru, in this case, we have to analyze the situation, freeze it in midair, and Omer Blo, we're going to say to that Yavam, Levi, who was Makadesh Leah, that since you were Makadesh her after her sister Rachel, the wife of the late Reuven, had fallen for Yibum. So first there was an Afila for Yibum and a Zika, and then only afterwards you went and you were Makadesh her. At the moment that you, Levi, were Makadesh Leah, that was a violation of an Isur of Achos Chalutzasa. And therefore, Hamtain, you're not allowed to consummate your marriage with Knisa L'chupa at this point. We're in a holding situation. Achiyasa Achicha Maisa. Now, what does it mean, Achiyasa Achicha Maisa? The word Maisa here can be interpreted in two ways, and they're both correct, as Yibum or Chalitza. These are the two methods by which the Zika could be removed. So that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is paskening in our Mishnah that in order to allow Levi to consummate his marriage with Leah, we need to get rid of the Zika between Rachel and Levi, because if that Zika is like an Ishus relationship, then Levi cannot consummate his marriage with Leah because she's Achos Ishta. So let's be in a hold and wait pattern. If and when the other Yavam will either give Chalitza to Rachel or he will be Miyabim Rachel, that would remove the Zika between Rachel and Levi, and then Yichnos es Ishto. Now we can allow Levi to consummate his marriage, because Leah, his wife, is no longer Achos Ishta, or shall we say Achos Kukasa. And that means that since the Yavam, let's call him Shimon, was Miyabim or was Choletz, he basically removes the Zika. That Zika between Rachel and Levi no longer exists. Another option is Mesa HaYevama, if Rachel died. Obviously, the Zika is gone. And then, if one of those three events happen, either Shimon is Miyab, or two, Shimon is Choletz Rachel, or Rachel never gestorben, she died, is then Yichnos es Ishto. Levi is allowed to now consummate the marriage that he had with Leah and take her into the Chuf. As Meis HaYavam, if Shimon dies, and now there's no one around for Chalitza or Yibum to Rachel, so in such a case, we have a real continuing Zika between Rachel and Levi. He's the only brother left, the only Yavam. And now he was Makadesh Leah, the sister of Rachel. What do we do now? Yotzi es Ishto begin. we're going to compel Levi to divorce his wife, Leah. He had no right to marry her to begin with. The Eshes Achiv B'chalitza. And now Rachel, the wife of the late Reuven, she gets chalitza. In Yibum, it's not an option because of the erva that we spoke about earlier called achos grushasa. And if she's achos grushasa, which we said before was a doraisa, then in truth, there should be no Yibum or even zikas between Rachel and Levi, because Rachel is the sister of Grushasa. Because we forced Levi to give a divorce to his wife Leah. Now, I'd like to understand whether this chalitza that Rachel requires is doraisa or derabana. Intuitively, I would have said that chalitza is only, just think about it for 1 more second, it's only derabana, am I correct? Because she is now achos grushasa. That she doesn't require. Oh, so he quotes here, talking the name of the Tosas Yantiv on this Mishnah, that this chalitza is only derabana. So let's analyze that. Yeah, on a derived level, since Levi was Megarish, his wife Leah, Rachel is an erev doraisa of achos grushasa. The only thing that bothers me is that there was a moment in time when Rachel was a full-fledged Zika relationship, had a full-fledged Zika relationship with Levi. Now then Levi went ahead and he, so to speak, married with Kedushin Leah, her sister. Now he divorced her. Do we say that on a deraisa level there's no Zika? There was a moment of Zika. I don't know. That's a little bit confusing. But in any event, he says here in the name Tos Yontiv that the requirement of chalitza is only derabban. The Gemara now raises the question that we raised. My v'chein, like the word v'chein in our Mishnah is very inappropriate because the word v'chein always connects with an analogy, the case that came before it with the case that comes after v'chein. But in this case, the Mishnah v'achol v'imta v'nasa achiv es hachosa, that's a drabanan halacha, whereas the megarish is ishto v'nasa achiv es hachosa, that was the doros halacha. So my v'chein, that's not a thing that's common, shall we say, to alteration of the sefer. Right? In the case of achos chalitzaso, that's the drabanan. In the case of achos grusha, that was a doraisa. So the Gemara says, Emel, let's change the gears in our Mishnah. Avol hamagarish. If a man divorces his wife and his brother marries the sister of his ex-wife, that's already a p'tur from Yibum v'chalitza. Okay, so I pointed out the differences between doraisa and darbanan. We could go a step further. In the ratio, we require chalitza because the whole din is only darbanan. In the second case, garish, that's already no zikas even at all, not even as far as chalitza. She doesn't require chalitza. So therefore, read it avol hamagarish. Reish Lakish kan shona Rebbe achos grusha midivrei Torah, achos chalutza midivrei sof. Here's where Rebbe made that very powerful formulation or principle. In the second case in that mission, it's Achos Grusha, and that's the Rei Torah, therefore she doesn't fall neither for Yibum nor for Chalitza. Nothing. Whereas in the Reisha, the first case, that's Achos Chalitza, that's only a Drabanan, and therefore she needs Chalitza. The Mishnah says, Achiv Vesachos, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Omer lo hamtein ad shiyatz, Icha Maisa, Omer Shmuel Alocha Kedivrei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Which means that if a Yavam falls, if a Yavama falls for Yibum to a Yavam, there's a Zika, and that's generates an Iser of marrying any of the Krovos of the Zakuka, of the Yavam, who fell for Yibum. And you can't be mafkia that Zika through Kiddushin. And therefore, the Makadish is not allowed to be Makonesis. Oh, she is Achos HaYavama. He has to wait until they remove that Zika in one of the three ways that we described before. Iboilahu. This is a Yevama falls for Yibum, and one of the Yevamim marries with Kiddushin the sister of the Yevam. After he gives her Kiddushin, Mesa Ishta, his wife died. Now be a Vimta. Let's say Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Rachel, Leah, sisters. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies, and Levi's Makadish Leah, the sister of Rachel. And now Leah dies. Should we say that since Leah, his wife, died, then the Isser of Achos Ishto regarding Rachel has completely been removed, and Levi could be Mi'abim Rachel? Or should we say no? Even though the Isser Achos Isha is Paka, but nevertheless, since she fell for Yibum to him, and then he was Mekadesh, her sister, meaning Leah, so that's called Nesra Olav Shah Achas. There's a moment in time when she is Asura, meaning when Reuven dies and Rachel falls for Yibum, at that point, Levi could have been Miyabim, but then Levi went ahead, he was Makadesh Leah, which made Rachel into Ishta. So at that moment that Levi was Makadesh Leah, there's an Iser Erva relationship between Levi and Rachel. And that Erva relationship will break up the Zikas Yibum, so there's no possibility of Yibum now. And therefore, even when Leah dies, and now the relationship between Levi and Rachel should be that of Heter, because she's no longer Rachel's Ishto, but nevertheless, she was Nesra Olav Shachas. The moment that he was Makadesh Leah, and Leah was alive and well, obviously, at that moment, Rachel became Achos Ishta. So the Gemara says this is a machlokas Amoron. Rav Rabbi Chanina Diamri Chavayu Mesa Ishto Mutter B'Yavimta. Now the barrier that prevented Yibum between Levi and Rachel has been removed with the death of his wife Leah. But over Avasi Diamri Chavayu Mesa Ishto Asur B'Yavimta. And intuitively, the logic here, the compelling logic, is that of Shmuel and Ravasi, of Kevod Shenitzra Olav Shah Achas. So the Gemara asks, Amar Rava, my time of the Rav. What's the logic of Rav? What's Rav going to say to the principle of Nesra Olav Shah Achas? meaning at the moment that Levi was Makadesh Leah, at that point, Rachel was Asura Olav. She was Asura Olav al Levi, the Iser Eshes Ach, the Iser Achos Ishta. Now, once there's an Iser of Achos Ishta, we go back to the Iser Erev of Eshes Ach. So the Gemara answers to defend Rav, Mishum Dahavi Yevamot Shehutra V'Nesra V'Chazra V'Hutra Tachzol Etera Rishon. Because before Levi was Makadesh Leah, Rachel, with the death of Ruvain, was Beheter Yibum, as far as Levi is concerned. There's nothing that would prevent Levi from being Mekayim in the midst of Yibum vis-a-vis Rachel. And therefore she had a Heter. So the Iser of Eshes Ach would not apply, and certainly not a Chosisha, because he had married Leah. Now he marries Leah, Nesra. Now the Yevamot, namely Rachel, becomes a Surah Olav. And that's because of Achos Ishto. Then his wife Leah dies, Chazra V'Hutra. The Yevamot is no longer, meaning Rachel is no longer a Achos Ishto. Is Tachzol Etera Rishon. There was a blockage that was formed that prevented Yibum between Levi and Rachel. That blockage was the fact that Levi was Makadesh Rachel. We removed that blockage. I'm sorry, that Levi was Makadesh Leah, I meant to say. And now we remove that blockage because she died now. Leah is no longer. So that's called Azra Latera Rishon. Even though there was a moment in between of Isur, but we don't apply the principle of Eved Nesra Lamis in a case where she started in a state of Rav Hamnuna raised the following objection to Rav from a brisa. Moshe Achim, Shnaim Nesum Shtei Achim. Have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Ruvain marries Rachel. Shimon marries Leah. And Levi is not married. Meis echad mibali achos. So that would mean that either Ruvain or Shimon died. Let's give the example of, let's say, Ruvain died. And his wife Rachel falls for Yibum to Levi. She does not fall for Yibum to Shimon because Shimon is married to Leah, Rachel's sister. So that Rachel, as far as Shimon is concerned, is an erva of Achos Ishto, but she falls for Yibum to the third brother, to Levi. The Asaba Mufta, and this Levi who's not married, Maimon, means Kesef or Shtar. So now we have a case where Ruvain's wife, Rachel, falls for Yibum to Levi, and Levi was Makadesh, the Yevamot Rachel, Eshes Ruvain, all the Shalom, with Maimon, meaning Kesef or Shtar. Now what happens? The Acharkach, after this Maimon of Kiddushin to Rachel on the part of Levi, he makes Achav Hasheni, Shimon dies. And keep in mind that Shimon was married to Rachel's sister Leah. And now Leah falls for Yibum to Levi. So Rachel had fallen for Yibum first to Levi. Levi implemented a mimer. Now Shimon dies, and Leah falls for Yibum to Levi. Now let's think about the fact that Rachel is Asura to Levi because of Achos Kukos. Leah's fallen Yibum to Levi. Correct? So in effect, both Rachel and Leah had fallen to Yibum to Levi. Just in the middle, Levi had implemented a Maimer to Rachel. The Achagach, after Shimon dies, Mesa Ishta, which means that Leah is no longer. So who's in the picture now? Only Rachel, the wife of Reuven, who received a Maimer. Now she's not a Chutz Kukoso because her sister Leah died. So what's going to be with Rachel now that she falls for you? Otsa Yevamot choletzes v'lo misyaberes. And we see here that Yibum has been precluded because Rachel, was initially Achos Skukasa. And so the Gemara asks, Amai, why is that Levi not be miyabim Rachel and just clinch? He started already with Maimer, let him complete it with Kisa L'chuppah. And if according to Rava, the reason for Rav is Tachselet Rishon, so that should apply here as well. Tehevi kmo Yevamot shehutra nesu v'chazor hutra Tachselet Rishon. Initially, when she felt evil, she was muteres. She only became Masura, I'm talking about Leah to Levi, when Reuven dies, just one second. When Shimon dies and Leah falls for Yibum, and now Levi's wife, quote unquote, Rachel, becomes Achot Skukasa. Because Rachel is the sister of Leah, who now fell for Yibum with the death of Shimon. But on the other hand, if now Leah dies, so Tachsel Tera Rishon. Right, at the time that Levi did a Maimer to Rachel, everything was perfect. He was well on his way to do Yibum to Rachel, the wife of the late Reuven. I mean, Shimon died later. And it's only when Shimon dies later, then Rachel becomes problematic to Levi because of the Zika to Leah, who was the wife of the late Shimon, who falls for Yibum. But we could go back to Tera Rishon. Ishtik and Rav didn't give an answer. The boss after Rav Hamnuna, who had asked this question, raised this, left, he checked out. Omar, Rav said to himself, Amailo Amrle, why didn't I tell Rav Hamnuna something about that price? Which price? This price you quoted as a kasha is Rabbi Elazar here. In other words, look, Shin Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbana. Rava says, I don't hold like Rabbi Elazar, I hold like the Rabbana. And what was Rabbi Elazar's shita? The Omar, Rabbi says that if a man divorces his wife and then he remarries her, and which he's allowed to do, and he dies without any children, there's no yibum. And this is Rabbi Elazar at the end of Masechet Yevamot, on Daf Kuf Tes, who holds that Nesuin Rishonim Apilim Liyibu, which means that immediately with his marriage, it's considered as if she fell for Yibum, only in potential, obviously. But we don't wait for the Shas Misa. We go back to Shas Nesuin. And that's called Nesuin Rishonim Apilin Liyibum. That's Rabbi Lozer's famous, unique sheet at the end of the Masechet, but we're getting a taste of it here. And therefore, when his brother divorces her, she's already a Grushas Ach. Then when he remarries her, you would say Chosra v'Hutralo, but Rabbi Loza holds Kevan Sha'om da Olav Sha'achas be'Isur Neseres Olav Holonis. So the Brisa that says that Kevan Sha'om da Olav be'Isur Sha'achas Choletzes Ve'enim Esyabenes, that's Rabbi Loza, who holds that since there was Omda Sha'achas be'Isur, is Asur Olavis. Rav, he was over a different opinion. He held Hutra v'Nesra Chosra Latera, Tassel Rishon. And therefore, Rava says, I accept the sheet of the Chachamim that reject Rabbi Lazar, and they hold she's muteretz. Why? Because Hutra v'Nesu v'Chozru Hutra Chozru L'Atera Rishon, and that's like Rav. Now, at this point, Rava retracts his original answer to Rav Hemnuna and reinstates the kasha of Rav Hemnuna. Hadar Omar, Rava is Choser V'Yomer. Even Rabbi Lazar, who holds that Nesuin Rishonim Apilin, Amor. When do we find the Omar Rabbi Lazar? In what situation Rabbi Lazar holds that Nesra v'Chazar v'Hutra is Asur Olamis? That's only Heichad Lo Chazia B'Shas Nefila. She wasn't Ru'uya L'Syabim at the time that she fell for Yibum, because the din of Rabbi Lazar was addressing a scenario in which she was already Asura on the Yavam before she fell for Yibum because of Grushas Achiv. That's the dafka in that case. That's where Rabbi Lazar holds that Nesra Olamis, Aval Heicha, Techazia B'Shas Nefila. If at the time of the Nefila for Yibum, she was Re'uya L'Syabim, fall mamish, and for example, here in our case, she was Re'uya L'Syabim when she fell for Yibum, and only afterwards, when her sister fell for Yibum, then she was Nesra L'Yibum because of the Isra of Achos Kuka Miyomar. We don't know that Rabbi Lazar would say such a thing, that they Asr Alonis in such a case. And he adds a note here in the Masifti. He says, "Kevan shalom atzinu shebedin habraisa shehutra b'shas nefila v'nesra v'chazav v'hutra cholkim Rabbi Lazar v'chacham." And we don't find any mention of Rabbi Lazar as a dissenting opinion in the Braisa. Shmamida, we should derive from that omission that in the din of the Braisa, everybody holds she's asura. So therefore, you cannot say that Rav holds like the chacham. And Kushas Rabbi Hemnuna Kayemes. And therefore the shtika, the original shtika of Rava, was appropriate. Now Rava goes back and he tries to reinstitute his approach, reinstate his original answer. Hadar Omar in Rabbi Elazar holds that even if she was Re'uya L'Yibum, at the time that she fell for Yibum, and only afterwards she became Asur L'Yavam for the Yibum, then we still apply the principle of Asur Olamis, even when later on the Isur was removed. And he's going to bring a raya to this from a Bryce. Tanya, we learned in a Bryce, if a man marries the sister of his Yevamot after she fell for Yibum, Rabbi Lazar Omer, as long as Yevimto is alive, he's not allowed to marry his wife. She's achos kukasuk shemesa Yevimto muta beishto. She's no longer, the Yevamot is no longer skuka, and he's mutter biachotza, because Mesa Yevimto. But Mesa Ishto, if in the opposite case, in the scenario where his wife died, Osi Yevamot choletzes v'lo yisem bemes, even though when she fell for Yibum, Hutra liyabum poal, she was mutter for Yibum in actuality, only after Nefila liyibum nesra, when he married his sister, nevertheless, Kevin should nefrol of Sha'achas Shuv, Ein Lo Heter Olamis. Hare Omedes Rasur Lisyabim, as Shmuel and Ravasi said above, on this very Amud, that Mesa Ishto also be a Vimto. And since it's only an Isa Drabanan of Achos Kuka, she needs Chalitza, but you see clearly that according to Rabbi Lazar, even if Hutra Liyibum B'Poal, if afterwards Nesra, Asuro Lonos, doesn't go back to original Heter. So therefore the Brisa holds like Rabbi Lazar, and Rav holds like the Chacham. Now the Gemara raises the following kasha. If Rav is meant to understand like the Chacham, he is standing on the shoulders of the Chacham, and therefore he's mutter b'yivimto, lema, why didn't Shmuel and Ravasi say, or shall we assume that Shmuel and Ravasi, who holds a Mesa Ishto also b'yivimto, is the Amrik Rabbi Lazar? And he is the dissenting view, and that's against the Chachamim. So the Gemara answers no. Afilu tema. You can reconcile Shmuel and Rav and Ravasi with Rabban. And you don't have to ask the question, why do they paskin that he's also b'yivimto? We could possibly say, Adkan lo kol miflagi Rabbanan alei Rabbi Lazar. When did the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Lazar? Ella, in the case of Megarish Ishto v'chzira, in that case, we're going to say, Muteres l'syamin. There's no Isur Yibum. And we're not going to apply the principle of Neseres Olanis. Mishum, they hold that Misam Apeles. It's only with the death of a husband does she fall for Yibum. And therefore, Chenises bin his Garsha, Mishas Nefil v'Elchlo Mitzar Alayu. It was Lo Hayakan Nesra. There's no Isur after the Nefil for Yibum because Lo Nafil Yibum Elo B'Misabal. And that was after he already remarried her. So since there was no Nesra over here, therefore the Chacham hold Miteres L'Syom, Aval Hachan, the Brisa of Rabbi Lazar, of Mesa Ishto, Osir B'Yivimto, that's a whole different story. There the Yevamot fell for Yibum, and afterwards he married her sister. The Itzar, and the Yevamot already was Asura Olav after the Nefila for Yibum with the death of our brother. Of the brother. So that's when Shmuel Ravasi will say that Afilu Rabbanan Modul Rabbi Lazar. Kevin Shenesrach al Nefila, she became Asura after the Nefila. It means that B'shas Zikas Yibum, we cannot apply the pasuk of Yevamot Yavel, therefore Asura. So this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Mem Aleph and Alpha. Yevamot lo tachlot tzvot tisyabim yishlot shlosha hadar. We wait from the time that her husband died, a 3-month minimum period of time, before chalitza or yibum. We're afraid that maybe she's pregnant from her original husband, and maybe she'll give birth to a vlad shel kayama. Obviously, yibum has to be postponed because he might be marrying Eshes Ach, sheyesh lo banim. But why not chalitza? So that we'll have to wait for the Gemara. V'chein kol shara noshim, any of the women whose husbands died, or they were divorced by them, they have to wait a 3-month period of time before they get remarried, and even before erusin. Because if she turns out to be pregnant, we have no way of knowing whether or not she's giving birth to a 9-month-old baby from her previous husband or to a 7th-month preemie to her second husband. We must have Havchana and Hamtana of Shloshim. The Mishnah goes on to say that echad besulos v'echad beulos, echad grushos v'echad almonos, echad nesuos v'echad arusos. The Gemara is going to explain what this Tana has in mind when he says bein besulos, shein grushos, almonos mina erisin, beulos shein grushos, almonos nesuin, lo yisarsu, lo yinasu, ad shushlosha chadosh. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, wait a second, hanesuos, if a woman had a full-fledged marriage and she became widowed or divorced, yisarsu, there's no reason to prohibit her from having erisin immediately. There's no need for hamtana to delay the erisin, la'avchin bein zera rishon zera sheni, because with erisin there's no such chashash, there's no intimacy, and there's no way we can assume that she became pregnant from her second husband, who only was ma'arisa. Varusos yinasu. And if for the first husband, who either died or divorced, there was no nesuin, there was only erisin, is yinasu. In that case, we're going to let her marry a full-fledged marriage immediately after the get or after the misa of Baal. There's no need to institute a hamtana here because she couldn't be pregnant from a previous husband. Chutzmin arusal sheba Yehuda, they shall libo gas. In Yehuda, as the Gemara records it at the beginning of Ketubos, they had a minhag of being yachid the chasam v'kanla before the knisa l'chup, and therefore it's quite possible that she became pregnant through an act of be'il of intimacy because of this libo gaspa, this very close relationship between the chasam and the kala. And then once again, if she became pregnant, we need havchan of shlosha chadosh. Yosi Omer, kol anoshim yisarsu. He will allow erisin, even if there was a full-fledged nesuin to our previous, because why should you require hamtana of gimel chadoshim in the case of erisin? Chutz min almana, except for a case of an almana. And there's another issue entirely. If she became an almana, she's chayev in avelus, a 30-day avelus period for the loss of her husband, and therefore not going to allow her to get remarried. And that's called, on the top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis, mipnei ha'ibur. So that we have here machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi with regard to avelus. Are we going to allow it to be misares, to have erisin during Yemei Ibur?